Is there anything you would have done differently?
We reported a true story.
Our colleague Brian Williams is back in Kuwait City tonight after a close call in the skies over Iraq.
Controversial Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh and questions about Kavanaugh's drinking in the past.
Sean Hannity, come on up, Sean Hannity.
Today, Andrew Cuomo is having a moment.
Hi, I'm Chris Steyerwalt.
And I'm Eliana Johnson.
Welcome to Ink Stained Wretches, where we break down what's going wrong and what's going right with the American news media. And Eliana Johnson, we're together again after an election week hiatus. We're back in the saddle. So much excellence. And I am sorry that the hectic election week schedule made getting our Wretch in harder. And I was very gratified to hear from all the folks who missed us.
Oh, I didn't hear from anybody, so I'm glad they all went to you.
Well, they're more respectful of you because you have this aloof distance from the madding crowd, whereas I'm right down there in the mud with them.
Yeah, okay. I'll take your word for it. So I think we're gonna do our front page. We'll talk about Republicans, Democrats, and the news business, but there's a ton to get through in the post-election fallout. So up first, we have the Daily Mail ticking through how exactly Trump stitched together this win, making gains with virtually every demographic group, and focusing on Black and Latino voters. And the Daily Mail writes that those two groups, particularly men, tilted more toward Trump this year than in 2020, with Black support nearly doubling to 15% and Latino support growing by 6 points to 41%, according to preliminary results from AP Votecast. And that was concentrated in Black and Latino men without college degrees. And they note that the shift toward winning minority voters is a new chapter in the GOP and a warning sign for Democrats who have taken that group for granted. The president-elect won non-college voters of all racial backgrounds by 12 points over Harris, compared with a 4-point lead in 2020. But that is something that's been happening for a long time. The education gap has been widening over 10 years, whereas the flight of minority voters from the Democratic Party really did speed up this election.
So I included this because while much of what it says is true, it was typical of a misunderstanding about what happened, and particularly with the word landslide. So it's been a long time for Americans since we've had a landslide. It's been since 1988. I mean, Bill Clinton's 96 win was, I'll give it landslide. It was complicated by the fact that Ross Perot was running again, but it's been a long time since Americans were familiar with landslide elections. And a landslide election varies by definition, but in a piece for the Dispatch, which I would paste into the document, but I can't because I don't have access to it. But if I could, I would point out that the Trump won 57.99% of the Electoral College, which is tied with James Garfield for the 44th of 60 landslide elections. And I think the tendency after recent elections, and this was certainly true after 2020, the tendency is to way overinterpret what voters are saying. And I did in the piece that I wrote for context, said Trump has a much more diverse coalition than he did when he won the first time. It's about as diverse as George W. Bush's was in 2004, which is to say, it looks like a winning coalition. That's what winning coalitions look like. And the Democrats' mistake, and we're going to get to the Democrats, but the Democrats' mistake after 2020 was believing that voters had voted for them instead of against the incumbent party. This is the first presidential election. This is the first series of presidential elections since the 1880s and 1890s, when the party out of power has been put out 3 times in a row, 2016, 2020, 2024. And all in pretty close elections. Again, this was decisive. Trump won all 7 swing states, but they won West Virginia, Pennsylvania. Well, at this recording, they haven't called Pennsylvania, but Dave McCormick should win in Pennsylvania, or you'd rather be him than you would be Bob Casey. And they won in Ohio and they won in Montana.
What do you mean I mean, the AP called Pennsylvania.
DDHQ has not called Pennsylvania, and I would not, a lover of fast calls, would not have called Pennsylvania, but I don't want to, I'm not here to second guess anybody else's aggressive calls, but there was still a lot of vote out in Pennsylvania because Pennsylvania has an annoying elections process, and they had, I think this was we're recording this on Wednesday. I think as of Monday, there were still like 175,000 votes because they have all these provisional ballots. It's annoying. And the lawsuits have started and all that stuff. But I expect that my expectation is that McCormick will prevail. So Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Ohio, and Montana. But Democrats held on in Arizona, Nevada, Wisconsin, and Michigan. The House, the Republicans are the Republicans are gonna win the House, right? It seems I'd given a 99.9% that when everything's counted, they're gonna win, but their majority, they started at 222 seats. Where are they gonna end up? 220, 221? I don't know. So the point being, decisive win for Republicans, but more significantly, a decisive loss for Democrats. And the way Democrats got in the position where they could experience that decisive loss was that they overinterpreted what had happened and spent the first 2 years of their presidency not doing what people sent them there to do. And they were extreme on issues. They were tone deaf, and the road to a Republican midterm defeat, substantial Republican midterm defeat, and the road to the first ever time that a fourth election in a row goes to a change of power starts with using words like landslide to describe a win that was convincing, but not a realignment.
Okay. I want to talk about what I thought was quite a good post-election column by John Harris at Politico, who the headline was "Trump has humiliated his foes."
Mm-hmm.
And he wrote that Vice President Kamala Harris may have been an imperfect candidate. The postmortems are vigorously underway on Wednesday morning, and that was a week ago Wednesday, the day after the election, but she delivered the essential Democratic argument perfectly well. The Trump era was something to be scraped off the national shoe. Instead, there will be another helping placed on the national plate. His adversaries don't have to pretend it tastes good, but for now, they need to eat it. And he notes that Trump didn't steal the 2024 election, but he won it pretty clearly. And for all the arguments that Democrats have made about his attempts to hijack democracy, he now has that argument in his favor, that he's the democratically elected president. He's also likely to win the popular vote. And this was the best post-election piece that I have read, indicating that that this is what Democrats are going to have to reckon with.
For sure.
And yeah, I thought it was quite good.
Yeah, and the question of democracy, right, was much litigated in this election and much discussed. And the Republicans said the Democrats were anti-democratic because they didn't have their primary winner serve as the nominee. But the Democrats' focus was very much on democracy, and they got it. And as H.L. Mencken said, democracy is determining the will of the people and giving it to them good and hard. And Democrats they asked a question they didn't want the answer to. And I think it was Pramila Jayapal, but one progressive who had said that she wasn't going to demand that the Senate filibuster be removed anymore when the Republicans have a trifecta, that she would drop her demand for the end of the filibuster because the Republicans are in control. And it struck me as sort of a perfect encapsulation of the misunderstanding. Both of these parties believe that they are the legitimate majority party in the country. I don't think either of them is the majority party in the country. I think we're toggling back and forth between minority parties. And now Democrats, and I don't want to skip ahead, but now Democrats are going to be focused on the anti-democratic, the anti-majoritarian aspects of government. And good, that's what the system's for. They're supposed to obstruct the way that Republicans obstruct when they're in the minority, and that's how the system's supposed to work. But Harris's piece was a very good one.
All right.
What about Elon Musk?
Should we talk Elon? Yes.
As we record this, Elon is aboard a plane with Donald Trump heading to Washington, where he is expected to join Trump in addressing the House Republican caucus, and that they're going to gather together and do that. And some have even wondered whether Trump would try to bring Musk to the meeting with Biden. The media obsession with Elon Musk is intense, and the amount of coverage that Musk generated during the campaign and will continue to generate as he hangs around Mar-a-Lago, pops in on transition meetings, and does all of this stuff. He's a celebrity. He's the richest man in the world. He owns the platform that journalists are obsessed with. The Elon Musk fixation, it is real. It is real, real, real.
One stray thought on Elon.
Mm.
Well, Harris paid and campaigned with an array of celebrities, from Beyonce to Oprah to people who I've never heard of before, but apparently are famous, rappers and hip hop artists. I don't even know. Trump went in a different, he campaigned with a different sort of celebrity, of which Elon Musk is the best example. And that proved to be pretty savvy, I think, on his part. There are a lot of people who like and admire Elon Musk in a different sort of way than people like and admire Hollywood celebrities. Musk's role in Trump world is interesting. So I think it was savvy of Trump. He's obviously using Elon and vice versa. I do wonder if at a certain point Trump is going to get resentful
of having
this
this much richer, very famous person.
Yes. And I wonder how aware Musk is of that, and how he's calibrating his interactions with the president for that. That has been a thought in my mind.
Well, Trump also today, it was announced that he is placing Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy as the heads of a presidential commission, the Doge Commission, which is something on government efficiency. And it's meme lord jokes, but I know that Vivek Ramaswamy, at least, he has some pretty radical ideas about the power that the president has to shut down agencies and vitiate civil service rules and all that stuff. But one wonders with Musk, his influence with Trump is because he powered Trump won in 2016 because he mastered Twitter. In 2020, Twitter was hostile to Donald Trump. And in 2024, X was all the way in, right? All the way in on Trump's side. So I would imagine that Trump has some fears about Musk. Also, as we're recording today, Senate Republicans are getting ready to vote on who the replacement for Mitch McConnell will be. And Musk jumped in that one too. And one wonders, I think your point is exactly right. At what point does Trump become resentful of Musk? But the other thing is, when does Musk tire of this? Because it's tiresome. The work of government and all of that stuff is tedious work. And it's not like when you buy Twitter and you can just fire everybody and tell everybody to pull all-nighters and do it for the hang. To me, it's as much of a question of when Trump tires of Musk. And by the way, to your point, the loyalists that have been around Trump for a decade and have entrenched themselves there, I'm sure do not like the fact that this mercurial billionaire is upending things and affecting nominations and doing all this stuff either.
Yeah. Let's get to Pete Hegseth for SecDef. But before we get to that, we should note Pete Hegseth, the Fox and Friends co-host who Trump nominated for Secretary of Defense last night, was the most unconventional in a series of relatively conventional nominations
Yeah.
from Trump that included, we hear, hasn't been totally confirmed yet, Marco Rubio to the State Department, Florida Congressman Mike Waltz to be national security advisor. I guess Kirsty Noem, the governor of South Dakota, to run the Department of Homeland Security is a little odd, given that she doesn't really have a background in that area. But it's not crazy to nominate a governor to do that job. Tom Homan, the former director of Immigrations and Customs Enforcement, to be border czar. Susie Wiles, who ran his campaign, to be White House chief of staff. So pretty conventional, all these things coming out relatively quickly. And then we got Pete Hegseth, the Fox and Friends co-host, nominated to be Secretary of Defense, which was definitely a throwback to first term Trump casting from the couch TV. And it's interesting. I thought this was crazy when I heard it last night, and now I'm seeing some sort of interesting defenses of it. But what was your take, Chris?
So everybody who Trump picked, including Noam, was on the MAGA side of conventional. Lee Zeldin for EPA. Elise Stefanik for UN ambassador, Rubio at state. That's all stuff that's like, I think from the perspective of traditional national security people, I mean, obviously we stipulate Democrats don't like any of them, but even for the Democrats who are more hawkish, I think those were received, at least in the ones who I've talked to, those were received as, okay, these are MAGA picks, including Noam. These are MAGA picks, but, you know, governor of a state who served in Congress for a long time. These are fairly normal. And then comes the Hegseth pick. And we should say the context for all of this is there's another pick out there that is the most significant of all Donald Trump's picks, and that's his attorney general. That's where the ultimate fight will come. The who serves as Secretary of Defense is, I don't want to say that it's not important. Certainly it's very important, but the Pentagon bureaucracy is enormous, well entrenched for 7 decades, and there are a lot of guardrails. It's a place where you want a lot of guardrails, but it's a place with a lot of guardrails. The Department of Justice is small by comparison, and Trump has some very novel ideas about what the Attorney General should be and do, which is to say the post-Watergate barriers between executive influence on the Justice Department are an odium to Trump, and he wants more power to dictate prosecution, which is something that a lot of Republican senators are not comfortable with. And so they're going to have 53, 54 in the Senate. And when Trump issued on Sunday a demand that the Senate recess so that he could make his appointments without confirmation hearings and without votes, this made many senators nervous. The Hegseth pick, if it was part of a package that Trump ran and said, I want Pete Hegseth to be at the Pentagon. Oh, and he also said, I think John Ratcliffe for CIA director. Again, same category. Yes. Like if you're a normie Republican, you say, okay, well, all fine. This is, the president gets to make his appointments. So far, Hegseth is the only one that might lose. The way that he could win would be that if it was in trade for taking down another nomination. And if Trump picked somebody for attorney general who was out of bounds in the minds of mainstream Republicans, then you might have to do a deal with Trump and say, okay, well, we'll let you have Hegseth, but then bird dog the undersecretary appointments at the Pentagon. And you're going to agree to take a Bill Barr, like a normal kind of pick for AG.
Yeah. Do you have any guesses about AG?
They've been trying. Eric Schmidt from Missouri took his name out of consideration. Mike Lee has been lobbying for it hard. Part of the interesting thing in all of this, so in a narrowly divided House, Trump has yanked 2 House members for posts. If he pulls Rubio, that Ron DeSantis gets an appointment, which becomes a politically complicated question for Ron DeSantis and how Donald Trump wants to play it. It would be an appointment of almost 2 years, which is a biggie. And then could Ted Cruz be the attorney general? Who's the kind of person who could get the support of rank and file Senate Republicans, who could get 51 votes in the Senate, but wouldn't offend or rankle Trump? And this is really set up as a defining struggle and a very consequential one.
Well, this got me excited. This Axios piece from this morning indicating that Trump is expected to shake up the White House briefing room.
Oh, before you do that,
and
can I say this,
sure.
which is what I meant to say about the Pete Hegseth piece. The Politico piece about Pete Hegseth is really flat because it just says they quote a defense contractor using a profanity in the headline. Who the blank is this guy? Blah, 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 blah.
Anonymous.
Yeah. And this is what John Harris was talking about, right? So Donald Trump won the election. He won it decisively. He gets to make his picks. The idea that, and Politico's piece wasn't entirely one-sided, but it definitely felt like the old way of being, right? It felt like Trump 1.0, where we talked to these insiders and they said they didn't like it, and these anonymous sources, and the hubris of a defense contractor or a lobbyist for a defense contractor saying, who the blank is this guy? And the answer is, well, you know who he is. You may not think that he's qualified, but you know who he is. And while it is out of the norm, to say the least, it is not. I put it this way. I was more surprised by how normal Trump's first picks were than I was that Trump chose a person most famous for being a morning TV host for his Secretary of Defense. This should not be surprising in that way. And everybody ought to get ready for what things are going to be like, and that includes the media.
Yeah, it's great. They also quote former Obama administration official, now at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, who doesn't like the pick. I think it's a surprising pick. Someone who's a TV personality, when the entire rhetoric from Trump and everyone else is that the world is falling apart, and you pick someone who is not necessarily the most experienced, said Max Bergman, a former Obama administration official, now at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Shocking is sort of an understatement when it comes to that appointment for Secretary of Defense. Well, the whole point is that you, the former Obama administration official, now at a think tank in Washington, D.C., would not like this pick and think it's shocking. That is actually the point.
Yeah, that's right. And I don't know whether it's a good pick or not a good pick, but it can't really be shocking. You may find it funny, but it can't really be shocking. And if we think back to this time in 2016, we're talking about Andrew Napolitano. Will he be on the Supreme Court? So it can't be shocking. It can be a lot of things.
I wrote that story. There's another aspect to this too, where there's like treating it like a joke and sneering at it. And I think it takes the media a long time to actually take some of this seriously. Like, Elise Stefanik is someone who's been sneered at and looked down at. But, the truth is like, well, she was kind of onto something with this university president stuff. It was something that concerned the country, was a serious political issue, vaulted her to national political stardom. And I think that's like the press at times is so busy looking down its nose and focusing on sort of the flip-flops and the way Republicans they once didn't like Trump and now they've bent to his will, as opposed to like sometimes the more serious issues they're talking about, in the case of Elise or others, that they like miss them completely.
Yeah.
But in fact, the country is paying attention.
I don't know if the country is paying attention, but I know this. I know that these outlets have to build up their sources inside the Trump administration. They have to build up their sources inside the Republican world. They have to go there. And I don't think they were ready for that. I think they expected Harris to win. And I don't think they were thinking about, okay, well, and the other thing, and we'll get to this in a minute, but if you have been writing pieces that say, if Donald Trump wins, it will be a catastrophe. Well, as Roger Ailes said of Glenn Beck, the problem with predicting the end of the world every day is that sooner or later you have to deliver. And I think the how bad will it be under Donald Trump part. And by the way, maybe they're right. I don't know. Maybe they're right. Maybe this is the end of the republic. I don't know. Who among us? But that way of thinking about the second Trump administration certainly makes it harder to do the scut work of covering a presidential transition, right? If everything is in the wildest possible terms, then how do you process and receive? And finding maybe the best way to say it is, the Washington media has not yet alighted on a conventional wisdom, a narrative that fits because, again, as we discussed, some of the Trump picks, most of the Trump picks so far have been within normal confines. Now we've got a couple that are pretty wild. And I think everybody ought to take a breath and proceed with careful, cautious, earnest observation.
All right. So the White House briefing room, Trump wants to turn it on its head. According to Axios, going to dispense with a lot of the tradition. Axios says confidants of President-elect Trump are considering changes that would give newer MAGA-aligned voices access to daily press briefings. It says at least 2 media executives who run MAGA-aligned news outlets told Axios they plan to apply for credentials that would give them access to White House press briefings. That's no surprise. The biggest thing is who would get the seats. There are 49 seats in the White House briefing room, and the White House Correspondents Association has control over seating, but the White House determines the press credentials. So it could be that the White House hands out credentials to lots of folks who then don't have seats, which is fine. They can stand. So you can have you can be credentialed but not have an actual seat. And this sort of dovetails onto who will be the press secretary. And I think actually that's a much more important question than who's going to be there, because I think the way to shake up this briefing room is to have a press secretary who is really capable of doing combat with the folks in the briefing room. And according to Axios, the names in the mix are Trump campaign national press secretary Caroline Leavitt, Trump advisor and attorney Alina Habba, and former Trump administration official Monica Crowley. But I'm team Scott Jennings, who was the breakout star on CNN this election.
Certainly he has proven. Well, certainly he has proven his capacity to do daily battle with mainstream and left journos. So it would be a good show, and he's certainly smart. And I don't know why he would want to do that, but what do I know?
I know for the good of the country. For the good of the country.
I don't know that the White House press briefing is. I keep wanting it to go away as an entity because I think it's mostly bad, and I think certainly the televised version of it, the video version of it is bad, but the media, and so when the party in power is a Democratic Party, Fox News and right-wing outlets make their bones by fighting with the press secretary. And then when there's a Republican, mainstream and left outlets make their bones fighting with the press secretary. And I know that you've been to a lot of these. I know that there is a lot of information that's just commodity information that needs to get across. Tell us when this is going to happen. When will the president tell us this? And I get it. I understand. And I met some of my best friends have been or are White House correspondents. But the institution of the daily briefing is as my youngest man child would say, buns.
Well, I'm sorry to tell you that get used to it because it's going to be back big time under
Yeah,
Trump.
I'm
who-
afraid
who
you're. I'm
loves
afraid
it,
you're
part of
right.
his daily television viewing.
Yeah. And poor who all did he have the first term? He ended up with, for a long time, Mike Huckabee.
It was
Mike
Sean
Huckabee.
Spicer, then Sarah
Yes.
Sanders,
Yes.
and then Stephanie Grisham.
Yes, that's right. That's right. So, good luck.
All right, Chris, let's talk a little bit about the Democrats. Today we have Trump returning to the White House to sit down with Joe Biden.
Many Democrats anguished, much anguishing over this normalization of Donald Trump, and many pointing out that Donald Trump didn't do that for Joe Biden. Why should Joe Biden do it for Donald Trump? Because he's the president. And by the way, Biden and Harris should commended is strong because it's what they're supposed to do, but it is laudatory that the president and vice president have accepted defeat, have not taken up any of the cuckoo bananas claims from Democrats that actually the election was stolen, and what about the shift and and that they've been appropriate about these things, and it is appropriate even if Donald Trump doesn't deserve it in the minds of Democrats. The Republic does, and that's good for them for playing by the rules and not going #resistance.
Chris, you flagged this New York Times op-ed
Amazing.
by Peter Beinart. Democrats ignored Gaza and brought down their party. And he writes,
Amazing.
by viewing Gaza's political repercussions merely through the lens of identity misses something fundamental. Over the past year, Israel's slaughter and starvation of Palestinians, funded by U.S. taxpayers and live streamed on social media, has triggered one of the greatest surges in progressive activism in a generation. Many Americans, roused to action by their government's complicity in Gaza's destruction, have no personal connection to Palestine or Israel. Like many Americans who protested South African apartheid or the Vietnam War, their motive is not ethnic or religious, it is moral.
Amazing. Talk about not getting it. Talk about missing the point. And there are a lot of Democrats who are angry at people like Beinart and the pro-Palestinian, anti-Zionist voters of Michigan who voted for Trump, or the uncommitted, blah, 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 blah. This was a 7-point shift nationally, 3 points in the swing states, but almost 7 points nationally. This was not because. When
you say this, do you mean the election results in general?
Yeah, Donald Trump did not win because of insufficient support for Palestinian interests by the Biden administration. You could certainly say that the failure to deliver a swifter end to the conflict was costly to Biden, right? After a year of fighting, things were still going on, and Iran is retaliating, and Israel's retaliating, and on it goes. That wasn't helpful. I'm sure that was not helpful to the Democrats' effort to keep the White House. But the idea that this relatively small, and when I say relatively small, I mean small, group of Americans who are passionate about this issue was determinative is hogwash. And what happens after an election is people say they want my party won or my party lost, either because of me or because they did not do what I told them to do. Voters are simply not that persuadable. Voters are simply not that ideological. You want to make a case for why high inflation cost the Democrats the White House. You want to make a case about why surge in the migrant population and a delayed clampdown by Democrats cost them. Yes, I can show it to you. I can show it to you in the AP Votecast data. I can show it to you in the move of 10 points in big cities. I can show it to you in the shift in the Rio Grande Valley. Lots of evidence that you can put forward to support that. What evidence do you have to say that not being sufficiently pro-Palestinian was what cost them? Well, vibes. The youth vote was down. I don't know. Felt bad. I didn't like it. And it's moral, right? Because they were immoral. This is the kind of thinking that will prevent the Democrats from getting their act together.
I mean, just on a more like zooming out, the idea that they lost because they weren't far enough to the left on any issue is laughable. Laughable.
There are people who did not vote or who voted for Jill Stein or whatever because of Kamala Harris's sprint to the middle in her brief campaign. No doubt. The inclusion of Liz Cheney in a Democratic campaign for the Peter Beinart kind of community of hardcore progressives, anathema, right? It's totally anathema. What it misses is the size of these voter blocks. And just like with the MAGA community, a relatively small, very online population that gets high on its own supply and it stages public rallies and gets the Twitter explosions going and all of that stuff. The people who shifted those 10 points in the big cities, the people who shifted all of the Biden Trump voters, and there were millions of Biden Trump voters, those people are so much larger in number than the Peter Beinart community. It's preposterous. And if this had been a very close election like 2016, a very, very close election like 2016, then there's an argument that you could make, well, if we had just gotten a few more of the uncommitted folks, if we could have gotten more folks on college campuses to vote, you could talk about it. They lost decisively, and they lost in the middle. That's where they lost.
That's my point, that the sizable number of people who moved from Biden, Trump, or from Obama to Trump in 2016, where they had been Obama in 12, those people are not moving because they're not moving away from the Democratic Party because the party was insufficiently left-wing. That's not what's moving them.
Yes, and the other thing that both parties should bear in mind, they don't move and stay unless they like what they get. So they moved to the Democrats in 2020, and then they moved to the Republicans in 2024. And if they don't like what the Republicans are doing, they'll move back to the Democrats. And this is why all the realignment talk makes me just crazy. There are some big trends in realignment that we can talk about. This is the first election that Democrats did better with wealthier Americans than they did with the poorest Americans. That the long-term shift of affluent, upwardly mobile Americans toward the Democratic Party and the shift of working class and poor Americans toward the Republican Party has been very real in the Trump era. Does it last beyond the Trump era? I don't know. I don't know if those voters come out, those same folks come out and vote for J.D. Vance if he's the Republican nominee in 4 years. I don't know. But the idea, we think so much in terms of coalitions and voter blocks that we forget that there are lots of persuadable voters. And this time they got persuaded. They were persuaded that they did not think that the Democrats should stay in charge. Oh, and
Chris,
this. Okay. I don't know if I should say who it is, but you'll be able to guess who it is. But a mutual friend of ours said, after Thanksgiving, the campus protests are going to heat back up. And those campus protests were very costly to Democrats. They definitely reinforced the idea of chaos and the anti-Semitism and all of that.
Well, it was less the protests than the response to them.
Yeah, the whole thing. And so the Washington Post, and I note, interestingly, that the Washington Post notes with some alarm that they're coming back, and that our mutual friend was right. They're coming back. The piece, when anti-war protests disrupted campuses nationwide last year, signs and chants demanded divest and ceasefire now. This fall, much of the protest language has grown darker, celebrating October 7th, 2020, the 2023 attack, echoing language used by Hamas and declaring glory to the resistance. And get ready, because with Israel as the flashpoint, but broadening out to take in general collegiate outrage, these suckers are coming back. They're coming back, and it's going to be ugly. And I think that did you see the Harvard Institute of Politics? The head of the Harvard Institute of Politics said, we can no longer be bipartisan. We can no longer be nonpartisan. This is a moral choice, blah, 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 blah. These universities, these elite universities, are in for a time of testing in the second Trump administration in a big, big way, because there isn't the thing where these kids' parents say, hey, you're not helping. You know, the Democrats are in charge. You're only helping Trump when you do this. The anger that's out there among the progressives is going to find its full flowering, and it's going to be a doozy. At least it's cold. At least it's cold, so maybe they won't want to camp out.
Well, I actually think this is going to be a really interesting story to follow because the campus protests that occurred during the Biden administration and the congressional inquiry into them laid the groundwork. You know, Congress has established Title IX violations on many campuses. And I think we were off. We didn't discuss a major report put out by the Education Committee that had a throwaway line at the end of it. But included in that report was text messages obtained by the House Education Committee indicating that the president of Columbia University, the former president, Minouche Shafik, had gotten a visit from Chuck Schumer, who said, just keep your heads down. It's really only Republicans who care about this anti-Semitism stuff on campuses. And then the administrators at Columbia are trading messages saying, hopefully Republicans take the House. Well, that didn't happen now. And there was a throwaway line at the end of this, 150-page report indicating that federal funding may be in play for universities that Congress determines are in violation of or violating the Title IX rights of students. So I actually think this is an area that will continue to be newsworthy and that will get very, very interesting in a Washington that has united Republican government.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think that these institutions of higher learning are going to have to figure out if the resistance is not only is it futile, it is misplaced. It's not what their institutions are supposed to do. And it's not what they're there for. They're there to educate. They're there for formation, not
I
activism.
think the question at these schools actually is, what does it mean to educate?
Yeah.
Because they are educating, but they are educating in resistance and radicalism. That is what their faculty believes education is. And so I think this is going to open a much bigger set of questions. And what we saw over the past, 2 or 3 years is that the leaders of these universities are actually incapable of doing leadership, imposing order, enforcing rules and norms. And so I just do think with continued Republicans had the House. That's why any of this happened over the past couple of years. But this could get quite interesting with the Republican president and with Republicans in the Senate who have started to indicate that they're going to get interested in this. We had no interest in this issue with the Democratic-controlled Senate over the past 2 years.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a hot ticket. I agree.
For the reason that it was actually also politically fruitful for Republicans. Look where Elise Stefanik is now.
Right.
Okay. Chris, did you want to talk about this Slate piece?
Oh, just another in the category of getting it wrong. This is at Slate, and this is written by Zachary Carter. The party must learn how to spin political narratives with active villains and hold them accountable. So it's basically a piece at Slate that says we need to demagogue people and target people the way Trump demagogues and targets people to give dumb voters a simplistic narrative about who the villains are. Democrats, he says, insist they are fighting for democracy in the public interest, but they have a hard time defining whom and what they are fighting against. It's time to figure that out. The future of democracy depends on it. So the answer in this person's point of view is that Democrats need to be meaner, they need to be more demagogic, and they need to be a progressive version of MAGA. And that's not why you lost. I want to tell you, if you are a Democrat, that is not why you lost. You lost because the spending spree, bipartisan, the bipartisan spending spree that Joe Biden and Democrats exacerbated after the 2020 election and the inflation that it caused. The amazingly obtuse decision to wait to put controls in at the border until late spring of the election year. Just bonkers.
That brings us to our news about the news biz. And Chris, we had the one and only Brian Stelter asking if Trump's victory is going to cause a journalistic brain drain in DC. He reports that a talent agent said what I've also heard anecdotally. A lot of reporters are, quote, questioning if they have it in them to report on another Trump cycle. You know, we noted this at the Beacon and said from his lips to God's ears, you know, hopefully all these people quit. Really amazing.
And they'll stick around for it. They're going to stick around for it. They say they don't want it. They'll stick around for it because they can't.
And what could be more fun?
Right.
What a fascinating political story to have a front row seat on, and what a ridiculous attitude.
They can't resist.
But speaking of which, you know, I actually think part of that response is feeling that they don't matter, that they hate him so much, and nonetheless he was elected. And that is what this next semaphore piece gets at. A tale of two jets. The old media grapples with its new limits. And Semaphore writes, Trump's victory isn't a result of a failure by news outlets to sufficiently hold him accountable. The real answer is one that is a lot more uncomfortable to grapple with. The national news media is more limited in its reach and influence than ever in the modern era. These journalistic prescriptions try to find a new way to reach people, try to treat subjects fairly and not alienate potential audiences, may be sensible. But the fundamental problems with the current economic model for legacy outlets aren't changing. And basically says nobody has any idea how to fix this. And I do think that's right. I'm not sure that the reach, that they're not reaching people. I think it's that people are tuning them out. They don't have influence. They're not viewed as credible. And this election was proof positive of that. Do you have thoughts?
A good and really useful piece. And I would just say something that I've talked about here a lot, and I think people should remember. People who criticize the media writ large should learn to be more specific, because the media as it was understood in my youth doesn't exist. The power of the, quote, mainstream press to do things and move things and shape narratives and do all that stuff, it's over, right? I think we have to learn to be specific. Talk about the New York Times, talk about the Washington Post, talk about CBS News as individual entities, but also talk about Elon Musk, and also talk about Joe Rogan, and also talk about these other things. We have to adapt to a highly decentralized world in which narrative creation and maintenance, which was the mainstay of the National Press Corps for 50 years, 60 years, just it's not there. It's not there anymore. And people in our business have to grapple with it and recognize it and figure out how to succeed in their little piece of it.
New York Times Tech Guild, Chris, they're back to work.
Amazeballs.
They took off the election trying to tank the Times needle, but they ended a week-long strike that started the day before the election, and they came back earlier this week. They were demanding no scented products in the back room and in the bathrooms, unlimited vacation time, and I can't even remember the other absurd things, but unlimited vacation was a good one. So they're back.
To try to blow up your newspaper's biggest night and the thing that the New York Times does best. And the New York Times muddled through. They got some needles up. They made it happen. But to try to tank that and then come back and say, well, never mind. We just wanted you to know that we were unhappy, is, if there's ever been an argument for AI at the New York Times, it's a real good one. That's a real good one.
Chris, that brings us to our obsessions of the week, where we break down the stories we can't get out of our heads. And mine was over at the Beacon. We did a winners and losers of the 2024 election, and Andrew Stiles wrote it, but we sort of crowdsourced in our newsroom who won, who lost. And I just wanted to highlight some of the fun ones. And it's a little bit tongue in cheek, but really serious. So some of our winners were Dean Phillips, the Minnesota congressman who primaried Biden and proved prescient. Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro, who may have helped Harris carry Pennsylvania, but in any event does not own the loss. Jeff Bezos, who stopped the Washington Post from endorsing Harris and said that nobody trusts the news media and they need to issue a course correction. Joe Rogan and Elon Musk, along with other independent news media outlets to which people turned. Scott Jennings at CNN, who was a media star of this cycle, and McDonald's. Going to have a renaissance under Trump was a major storyline this campaign. And then the losers, Alan Lichtman's keys. Will anyone ever care about them again?
I didn't the first time.
I think.
I didn't the first time.
Yeah.
To be fair.
Well, those are over. Ann Selzer and her Iowa poll was a big loser. And the Lincoln Project failing to stop Trump for the umpteenth time. So yeah, these were fun to do and fun to tick through.
My obsession was triggered by a study that was done proving fact-check journalism. So here's the BBC. 2 Australian mathematicians have called into question an old adage that if given an infinite amount of time, a monkey pressing keys on a typewriter would eventually write the complete works of William Shakespeare. Yeah, duh. Is it a stoner question like, am I a butterfly dreaming that I'm a man, or a man dreaming I'm a butterfly? Is it a way just to talk about that that time is powerful, right? How do you make the Grand Canyon? Water can do the work. You just need millions and millions of years. Is it a way to talk about those things? Yes, but it's not something to fact check. And this election was a great instruction in the limits of data, what it can do and it can't do. How were the polls? Polls were about how they were last time, which is to say Trump was understated again. We knew the election would be relatively close, and we knew that it would probably break in one direction. But public opinion polling is not going to be able to precisely predict the exact outcome of elections. It can't do that. Even if we try our best, even if we do whatever, it's not going to work. And so this points me to, so data science can do things like prove things that we already knew were not really true, like monkeys on keyboards. Can they do employment numbers? Here's a piece from the Wall Street Journal. Pro take, less jobs data is going into the jobs report. Survey responses are down, and the Bureau of Labor Statistics came close to reducing the population sample size amid budget concerns. So this is, most people probably already know this, but if you don't, the unemployment rate is based on some real data that the Department of Labor have, and then they're based on surveys, which are no different than election surveys. So when you see the unemployment rate ticked up by 0.2%, and blah, 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 it's directional, but it's what? It's survey work. So you shouldn't take changes in the unemployment rate any more literally than you take, Donald Trump improved by a point in October. True, right? There's truth in it, but it's not dispositive. And I think Americans who worship data science and the belief that all of these things are knowable are going to have to come to terms with the limitations thereof. And the limitations include, we have to use our prudence and we have to make good decisions about things. And we won't always have satisfactory data to guide us. Harumph.
Chris, that brings us to my favorite time of the week, which is reader mail. And this is so funny because this exact thing happened to me. We have a note from Joe in Washington State. He writes, "Hey, Wretches, I also love 100 Grands, Rolos, and other goodies like that. I'm curious if you heard about the controversy that surrounded 100 Grand this year." And he links to a Reddit thread where somebody says they got a whole big bag of Halloween candy and there was only one 100 Grand bar in it.
Whoa.
And he says, "I apologize for linking to Reddit, but not only did I experience the same as this poster, so too did two separate members of my wife's family. Costco only put a single 100 grand candy bar in their Halloween
on.
collection. I think this is the real October surprise. Love the show. Chris, I have been slowly getting my dad to watch more News Nation than other outlets. I think we tuned in for debate coverage where Chris Cuomo was anchoring, and if I'm honest, we were both shocked at how well he did. Anyway, I know he has been peaking in since and know a diet of less rage baiting is doing well for his soul. So I got a bag of Halloween candy, not at Costco. I got it from Amazon, and there was more than 100 grand, but the amount of 100 grand in crunch was way out of proportion to the amount of everything else. There was only one crunch bar for sure, unless my husband ate a bunch of them behind my back. And there were like 100 grand bars. And I did notice that.
I can live without the crunch. Crackle is an improvement over the crunch, but 100 grand is where it's at. And
I noticed that, and it bothered me.
This is right up there with McDonald's denial of the McRib this year. You say McDonald's will have a renaissance, not if they don't bring the McRib. And this is a slight against me. I'm being targeted by the American food industry, and I resent it. But I do not resent you, Joe, from Washington. And I'm glad your dad finds it okay. And yours is a story that I've heard from a lot of people, that families can be happier when they consume a more balanced news diet, and that the news can be entertaining, but it's not entertainment. So thank you.
Chris, you want to take us into our favorite items of the week?
Oh, yes. Okay. History buffs rejoice. So of all the post-election analysis, this from F.H. Buckley, right after the election in the Wall Street Journal: voters reject the party of scolds. And it's so Buckley is a professor at the Scalia Law School and the author of The Roots of Liberalism. And it's a great little cultural history. It's a brief piece, but it's so well written and it's so good, and talks about what patriotism means and what the real meaning of e pluribus unum is. And it's good, and I commend it to everyone. It's quite a nice little piece.
Chris, we would be remiss if we left this episode without discussing the video of the New York Times opinion section put out the morning after the election.
Yeah.
And somebody on Twitter said, if Jonestown had recorded a final video, New York Times on worst case scenario Trump. So it's head-on videos of each member of the opinion section talking about their worst case scenario of a Trump administration. And we just got to play the whole thing.
The worst version of a Donald Trump administration is very, very bad.
One that is not only extremist, but also effective in that extremism.
Emboldened by a series of Supreme Court rulings, perhaps bolstered by support in both houses of Congress, Trump will fulfill his promise to be a dictator on day one.
He sends troops into neighborhoods like my own to try to round up undocumented immigrants, that he sets up a network of camps.
Mass deportations. It would likely plunge the United States into something like a recession. His tariffs, likewise, promise to spike prices for most Americans and cause costs to go up dramatically.
That version of Trump could result in abandoning Ukraine to advancing Russian armies, could result in extraordinarily erratic foreign policy in the Middle East.
I mean, Donald Trump often talked about things like bombing Mexico to deal with drug cartels.
All right. That is a wrap for the news about the news. If you have a story you want us to talk about, email us at wretches@nebulouspodcasts.com and sign up for our newsletter at nebulouspodcasts.com. This has been Ink Stained Wretches from Nebulous Media, produced by Colin Chicola. Find us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. Just search for Wretches.